Good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. It's Friday. Celebrate a little bit. Join us today for the food safety chat. Pull up a chair and join us for a conversation. On this time, every Friday on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter, we go live and we discuss a food safety topic, and I bring an expert to join me, and we'll have a discussion around that topic. So if you're new to the food safety chat, one of the things that you'll notice is that this is not a lecture. This is a conversation. And we're building a really cool community. And I'll give some links on some other resources as well here later on. And with this, we're able to interact around food safety, because one of the mantras and one of the things that I strongly believe in with food safety is it's not a point of competition, in that we're all in the same boat together. If we're working in the food safety quality assurance discipline and you're working for a company, we have a greater responsibility. If you're working in ice cream, what happens in one company impacts everybody who works on that. So the better we understand food safety principles and leadership and people, the better off we're going to be. And as a great example of that is Tim, who is like clockwork, is able to join us most weeks. So Tim, super glad to have you here. Thanks for joining us and taking the time, because this is an investment, right? An hour out of your week, a 40-hour work week is a lot. And if you're watching this on recording, that works just as well too. So we're really glad to have you here. So one of the things we like to do here at the beginning is, I always want to jump into the topics right away, but it's kind of let us know where you're at in the world, as Tim is doing, right? I'm in Loveland, Colorado. Austin is also here in Colorado. And we had a decent sized snowstorm here earlier this week, and everybody's kind of digging out of that. I heard another one's on the way too.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah. So what's really interesting with Colorado is, number one, because of like advertisements and ski resorts and things like that, everybody thinks we all live up in the mountains, but the majority of people by far in Colorado live along what we call the Front Range, which is the cities that are at the base of the Rocky Mountains, and then people tootle up into the mountains on the weekends. And we're down in the Front Range, where it's like, Fort Collins, Loveland, where I'm at, Longmont, Broomfield, Denver, Colorado Springs, all the way on down. So that's where we're at. Gene is in beautiful Boise, Idaho. I used to go there quite a bit. I ran quality assurance for Lactalis American Group, and the Sorrento plant in Nampa was one of my plants. And so nice to see you. Always liked going into Boise. Nice place. You ever been to Boise, Austin?
I have not. No, I'm hoping to get out that way soon to do some work with some companies in Idaho.
Yep, very nice city. Claire, Oklahoma City. Also, last time I went through Oklahoma City, it was shocking how big Oklahoma City has gotten. It's a gigantic city now. Lloyd is in Elk Grove Village, Chicago. Love Chicago, always another fun city to go to. And if you work in food safety, inevitably every year there's a conference or two that's taking place in Chicago, and we're out at Rosemont. That's where we tend to end up. Somebody out on the flatlands of Colorado, right? Because that's part of it too, right? Everybody thinks that Colorado is just all mountains, but more than a third or so of the state is flat, right? It's out, and it's the plains, and you have cattle ranches and wheat and all these types of things too. So very diverse out here in Colorado for sure. So if you're new to the chat again, right? So we'll dive into our topic here shortly. And if you're a veteran who's been here on more than one occasion, you're probably pretty excited that you're here today, because Austin is here. Austin Welch, who is with Sage Media, and Austin and I became friends. Oh gosh, I don't know, about a year ago or so. And what Austin and his company are doing in the training space is really revolutionary. Because one of the things that we're all very familiar with, and hi Joy, nice to see you, is in the food industry, training has been the same forever. And we all know it's ineffective. It's a PowerPoint, people who don't want to be in the training, somebody who's given the presentation who doesn't want to give it for the 50th time. And there's a quiz at the end, and everybody knows the answers. They're like A, B, B, A, B. And if somebody doesn't pass, it's just a motivation. They have to go back again, right? So they want to get everybody through it, and it's just kind of this big, I like to call it kabuki theater, where it's really not moving the ball forward. And with Sage Media, and Austin has his email address here as well, they're doing some really cool things, because as we all do, right? And I do this at night, right? I'm watching Vikings Valhalla right now, is you go into the story. and you learn about the characters and their motivation and the challenges they need to overcome and the objectives they're trying to meet at the end, the hero's journey, right? And Austin, and forgive me if I'm slaughtering the philosophy of your business here, but it's teaching people and helping companies develop more of a storytelling mode relative to how they do things.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, the quickest and easiest way I explain Sage Media, because it is kind of a different concept, is as a Venn diagram. So like what kind of makes up the company and our philosophy. If you imagine 3 circles within this Venn diagram, you have Sage Media in the middle. What we're kind of composed of is visual storytelling in one circle. So, we're filmmakers, first and foremost, really. And then the second circle is adult learning theory. So finding ways to tie storytelling into learning design. And then the third circle, which is what we're going to cover some of today, is cognitive science. And so understanding how and why people behave the way that they behave, how they learn, and then what motivates them to learn and to behave in certain ways. So taking that cognitive science, utilizing research from that field to inform both the storytelling and the learning design. So to create behavior-based training programs as opposed to just knowledge-based.
Right. And that's a huge distinction. And it's something that we talk about quite a bit on the chat is technical skills are great, but there's also the people side of things. And part of the people side of things, check out this segue, is we need coffee. People need coffee. Huh? So everybody, please join us for our morning sip of your favorite beverage. Ah, wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Keep this going for sure.
Yes.
So I'm so proud of myself on that segue. But one of the things that you'll notice on this chat as well, right, is I always want to jump to the topic right away and not do the simultaneous sip and the drink together. And so I got it in this time. Thanks for joining us on that, Tim. So we have the doing side of things, right? The technical stuff, the KPIs, all the information that we track. But if you're ineffective and you're not a good leader and you can't communicate that information and figure this out, that's all moot, right? We were talking a little bit here offline before we got on. And one of the things that was a big revelation for me, Austin, was blind spots and, how people perceive us. And this is just an evolutionary fact, right? People are very, very good at picking this up, right? And you can go on YouTube and look at all these videos around, body language and all these type of things, right? And micro face expressions and people who are good at poker and being able to decipher these type of things, right? For myself, my face is an open book, right? If there's something I don't like, it immediately, and there's nothing I can do about it, right? If I don't like something, I'll go, right, make a weird face. And what I didn't know, and this was a big lesson for me in my career, is when I was working, I have like forgive me everyone for saying this, but a resting bitch face, right? When I'm working, I'm concentrating. And I'm looking at the screen, I'm typing away and I'm like this, really concentrating on what I'm doing. And people interpret that as anger. Mm-hmm. And people would come to my office to talk with me and they would look in the door and see me sitting there like that, right? And they're like, oh, bad time. And they would leave. And I never knew, right? And so once we started going through this course at the company I was at, and they were teaching us these things, and that came up, and people told me about that, and I'm like, oh my God, really? No, I'm not, no, right? And so at that point in time, I became aware of it, right? Was I able to change it? No, but I became aware of it, right? So that if I was doing this when I was working, and I saw somebody at the door, oh, hey, how you doing? Come on, right? And then I was aware of it, and that's a big chunk of it.
Yeah, and that gets into the metacognition, which is kind of what part of why I wanted to talk about this. As I told you, I started outlining a book around kind of leading for food safety culture, and before we can lead anybody, we have to understand how we work and how we operate, because then we can see how that translates into the people that we're around, and we have a better understanding of our behaviors. Kind of like, you were talking about before we jumped on the call, it wasn't until you went back and listened to some of your old webcasts and realized that you used the word right a lot as a filler word. And that was literally a blind spot. You had no idea that you were doing that until it was brought to your attention. And then it's like, okay, well, this is something I need to work on as a public presenter or public speaker. So hopefully what we'll kind of dive into today is an understanding around motivation. So I don't know how many.
Fun was that? If I say the word right and I'm speaking, call me out in the comments, everybody. Say, hey, Bryan, you just said right. And you'll help me correct you'll provide some feedback to help me correct my behavior. So with that, right, I mean, really kind of our first topic around this is motivation, in that we've all seen, Myers-Briggs, ISTJ, which is what I am, and analyticals and these type of things, right? People have different ways of learning and different ways of bringing in information and different things that motivate them. And with that, there was kind of two main categories, Austin, that you were talking about. Can we kind of take a look at those, or what are kind of those two main categories?
Yeah. So when we look at motivation, so when I first started getting into this, originally all the research that I do comes from these questions that come up where I'm like, I don't have an answer for this. So, in reading like Frank Giannis's book of, food safety culture equals behavior, then it gets you thinking, well, what causes behavior? And that's where we get into motivation. Yep. So, behavior is the action that we see, but the behavior has to be spurred by something. And so I'm like, well, what's that spurring? And that's the motivation. The motivation is the itch that has to be scratched, if you will, that drives a behavior. And that's why we behave in any way, is because there's that certain catalyst of some sort that comes in the form of some type of motivation. When I first started looking into this concept around motivation and motivation theory, I looked at it, or my understanding of it was from the extrinsic side of motivation. So there's two different forms of motivation. You have extrinsic motivation and intrinsic, right? And so extrinsic is what most of us think of, right? And that's where motivation is done to somebody, right? It's the carrot and the stick. It's I behave in a certain way because of a reward or because of a punishment, right? And so that's the vast majority of motivation in general. I go to work.
An example of that would be like your objectives and performance review for the year. It's like, okay, as an employee working for me, if you get these things done, then I will give you this bonus and this raise.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, or look at your audits, right? I mean, audits are primarily extrinsically motivated. So, and there's different levels. What's really interesting about this topic is that motivation works on a spectrum, right? And so, at the very far end, you have amotivation, which is lack of motivation. There's no motivation at all. And there's different levels of extrinsic motivation that go from, like I said, like I'm just trying to avoid a punishment, to I'm trying to gain a reward, to this is something that I associate with as my persona, right? And then the highest level, you will, is that second type of motivation, which is intrinsic motivation. So it's I do something because I desire to do it. So a lot of us think of like hobbies, right? Like I myself engage, I do black and white film photography. And that's something that I engage in because I'm intrinsically motivated. It's not because it makes more sense or because it's faster. I mean, it's much more complicated, but I'm intrinsically driven and I'm curious about the process. And so therefore I will engage in it for hours at a time with no other reward other than the act of doing the thing, right? It's like, I might come out with a good photo, I might not. It doesn't really matter because I enjoy the process. And so that's the concept of intrinsic motivation, is the act of doing the thing is the reward. And so in a perfect world, we would all be intrinsically motivated to engage in these food safety behaviors and go to work. But that's not always the reality. So most of the time we're working with both ourselves and the people that we work with on kind of this extrinsic level of motivation based on some type of reward or avoiding a punishment. But that's what that's what I became really fascinated with, was that topic of how do we graduate through those levels of extrinsic motivation and hopefully get to the point where we are doing things on an intrinsic level, where because we enjoy the process, or we associate with like, that is who I am and that's why I do this thing, right? Like wash my hands, or you use procurement a lot, right? It's like my job as a procurement employee is not just to buy things at the cheapest price, but it's I associate with the fact that I contribute to food safety through my purchasing decisions.
Yeah. Interesting. So extrinsic and intrinsic motivations, right? It almost sounds like there's kind of a spectrum here, right? They're not autonomous things. Is it possible then to move things from one group to the other? So for example, extrinsic motivation. My wife comes to me and says, Bryan, you're getting fat. You need to exercise, right? I'm like, right. And that's not going to really move me too much, right? It's kind of like, okay, that's the carrot, right? It's like, okay, I need to exercise today, because when my wife comes home from work, she's going to say, did you exercise today? Right. And that's that carrot and stick thing. But then moving that internally to, okay, I want to exercise, right? Try and keep me away from exercising. It's so integrated in who I am. I'm, super awesome exercise, right? That's tough, right? That's tough to get to that.
It's really tough. I mean, and that's something I struggle with, like I go to the gym twice a week, and every time, before I go every time, I'm like, like, I don't want to do this. And then by the time I get there, I'm glad I went. So like what I'm, so I'm at the point where now I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I obtain that feeling I have whenever I'm 10 minutes into the workout, where I'm like, I'm glad I'm here. I'm, this is great. How do I get that 30 minutes earlier so that I'm excited to go to the gym, as opposed to like begrudgingly go to the gym? And I'm still trying to figure out the answer to that. I mean, so much of it comes back to habits, right? I mean, it's as we continually do things and continue to, master these new skills, we have, and there's a great book called The Power of Habit, and it talks about, triggers and how those triggers lead to new habits. So much of habit formation is just replacement. It's not that you're developing a new habit, it's that you're taking an old habit and replacing it with a new thing, because literally the neuronal connections in our brains can't be broken. So like, I was a smoker for the vast majority of my life. I quit smoking 10 years ago, and I chew gum, and it's like, and I'm still 10 years out and I still chew gum, because it's just like, there's that thing in my brain where it's like, I got to actively be doing something constantly. And it used to be constantly going out for a smoke break. But now I chew gum.
I'd heard on the smoking side, part of the motivation for people for smoking is it's not necessarily the rush of the nicotine or things like that. It's the ritual, and it's the breathing. It's the right, where you're slowing down, right? You may have some social interaction, right? You're outside the building with a couple of other people, chatting and talking and relaxing, and it's that part of that ritual, right, of how you do things, and it becomes integrated.
And that's a great point, because you touched upon ritual, and ritual is really important when we're looking at things around food safety and food safety culture, because that's part of what we're trying to do, is create these rituals that become integrated into, like, this is our daily behavior and this is what we do. And so talking about that ritual aspect kind of like is a great segue into, the next question, which is, if motivation is what drives behavior, then what drives motivation? So how do we create that motivation? And so we were talking about the two different forms, right? Extrinsic and intrinsic. But generally speaking, what's fascinating about motivation theory and motivation research is there's a field of study that came out, I think, in the 90s. And it's called self-determination theory. And so self-determination theory is kind of like the most widely accepted theory around motivation in the world. Actually, I might be speaking out at they're having their annual conference in May, and I might be doing a presentation out there around motivation and how it ties into learning design. Right. But what's cool about this theory is they've researched this over and over and over again and found that the driver to motivation is that there's three core psychological needs. So, I picture these as like nutrients, the three nutrients that all human beings require to be motivated or to have motivation to do good work and to have a well-balanced psyche so that we have that motivation to behave. And so those three elements that kind of ignite that motivation is a sense of autonomy, and a sense of relatedness, which you were talking about, right, with ritual, right, that connection to other people, and a sense of mastery. So these are the three things that we know. These are the three foods that nourish us psychologically so that we feel compelled or motivated to behave in a certain way. And so what's cool about this, so when we look at, autonomy is one of the biggest ones, right? And autonomy is simply the idea or the fact that I have volition, that I have free will and choice within my world, my domain. And because everybody wants to feel that they are their own person. I mean, it's just no matter where you are located in the world, where you are in the socioeconomic scale, what religion you're part of, what regional culture, autonomy is universal, that we all want a sense of autonomy.
So for my prior example, if your spouse says you're getting fat, you need to start exercising, right? You're going to push back against that because that's infringing on your autonomy.
Exactly. So going back to my smoking days, right? My wife would come to me and say, "Hey, you need to quit smoking." And I finally told her, I said, "Look, the more you badger me, the more I'm going to dig my heels in. So it's going to have to be on my own terms." And she did. She stepped back and because I was like, this has to be my decision to do this. And I think a lot of people can relate to that that stubbornness, because that's just human.
And what they're saying is true and it's right, and we know it.
Yep.
But that's very interesting, right? Because a lot of times I've never made that connection, right? Where the reason you fight back is because it's violating that rule.
Yeah. And so we want to be able to make our own choices. When we look at mastery, the second psychological need, we all feel that we all want to be masters of our domain somehow. We want to know that we're good at what we do, right? I get up and I go to work, and regardless of the job that I have, I want to feel that I'm good at it. And so that's, even if it's not a super, what we would consider a complicated job, people always take pride, or, they want to take pride in the work that they do. And so finding ways to create opportunities for people to either show their mastery or to engage in that mastery helps to motivate those behaviors. And then
I have a good example of that. So, and I didn't know this. So I had a neighbor who was trimming some trees in his yard, and I was watching these guys, and they're climbing around up in the tree, and they're cutting the branches, all these type of things. And it was these three guys, and they're having a great time. They're talking with each other, they're BSing, they're razzing each other, they're having a lot of fun. And I was like, I didn't know you could trim trees in the winter. And I'm like, I wrote down the name of the company and made an appointment, and the owner came out. And it was this young kid. He was maybe 30 years old or so, right? And he came out, he's like, yeah, he's like, this is the best time of year to trim trees. And I'm an arborist and I love what I do. And he started educating me. He said, okay, look at your maple tree. Can you see where these two branches go off? And you see this juncture right here. Yeah. He's like, what's going on here is you have your dominant leader and you got this other one going off to the side, and they're both fighting to become the dominant part. And you can't let that happen. There has to be one. And so what we do is we trim these over here and stuff. And I was getting sucked into this. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. He's like, yeah. He's like, let's go back in your backyard and look at these trees. And by the time I was done, it didn't matter what price he was going to tell me. This was the guy, right? This was the guy. You know,
exactly.
He was a master of his field and he loved it. And he was educating me on his knowledge, and that was bringing him joy.
Right. And so that's a great example of that intrinsic motivation, right? That dude wakes up in the morning excited to go to work because he's like, this is what he's meant to do. You know, I'm in a situation where I'm very fortunate and I'm intrinsically motivated to do the work I do, right? I wake up and I'm like, man, I've got so many different, you know, options of projects that I'm going to be working on today. You know, the question is, how am I going to spend my time best on which one is the most exciting and the most pressing at that time. But very rarely am I begrudgingly getting up and it's like, oh God, I gotta figure out my next film script. Boy, what a bummer this is. Or I gotta create, you know, a curriculum. So yeah, I mean, that's a great example of that intrinsic motivation. And it's because he has that opportunity, you know, for the mastery of the work that he does. But a lot of it is probably also that autonomy, right? That like he goes out and does this work and has the opportunity to continually like master his skill, but also, you know, potentially create his own schedule. You know, that's a whole other topic that my wife is looking at right now, which is burnout among physicians. And you know, so much of burnout within medicine comes from this lack of autonomy, right? That they go through all this schooling and get ready for this work, and then they get in and there's no autonomy in how they practice medicine. Or there's an issue around mastery where it's like, well, I learned how to practice medicine this way, but the insurance company is telling me I got to practice it this way, right? Yeah. And so now I'm not able to actually engage in that mastery anymore.
Right.
So
well, it's gotten to the point too with that field where you wonder who you're really talking to when you were with your doctor. You know, is this the doctor who is giving me the best advice for me, or is this being filtered through edicts from the insurance company or what else, right? And it causes doubt.
Yeah. And then, that, going back to the psychological needs, right? So we talked about autonomy, we talked about mastery, and then the third one is relatedness. This is the third psychological need that we all have universally as human beings, which, and it's fascinating because this is where I see some really interesting stuff whenever I'm doing interviews with like employees within an organization around food safety culture. And so relatedness can be both my relatedness to my team, right? The immediate team that I work with. It can be my sense of relatedness to my manager. It can be my sense of relatedness to the company and, the company's mission and the work that we do. And then also my relatedness to like how the work that I do contributes to the greater good of society. How what I do actually, in some way leaves some kind of legacy.
Well, I would be curious to hear what people think about this in the comments as well. Is what we do in food safety, that's a huge motivator, right? We're helping to protect people and help protect their children and make sure that people don't get sick or die, right? It's a gigantic burden. And it's a huge driver, right, in this field of what we do.
Yeah. And I mean, and what's really, so to give you an example of that, that social relatedness of the greater good, before I got into food specifically, I just kind of worked with all different types of companies around leadership development programs, organizational change management, things like that. And I went into a steel company. They manufactured flat roll steel. So you imagine these big rolls of steel that you see that are used for all kinds of things. and it's a very monotonous job. And so, mhm. So I went in and started interviewing the employees, and what was really interesting was I would ask them, okay, what do you do? And they would start explaining a little bit of the work that they do, but every one of them would like tie what the what seemed like a menial task into a larger thing, where they're like, well, I make the steel that goes into the panel of a car that will hopefully save someone's life when they get into a wreck, or I make the steel that goes into the unit of an air conditioner that's going to be used in Atlanta, Georgia in the middle of August to keep someone cool. And so I was fascinated by this because without any cues or me trying to elicit these answers, everybody gave me some example of like the work that I do ultimately translates into something greater than the seemingly menial stuff that I do here. I am just the front end cog of this much larger machine, but my role is very critical. And I was that really fascinated me. And so that was, doing those interviews was really what led me into doing more research around like, qualitative interviewing and how we can utilize qualitative interviews to identify specific themes to then use within the creation of these training programs.
Wow.
Which could be a whole other topic, but around how to interview people and to use qualitative research in that way, because that's usually where we find the most interesting aspects of culture is within those interviews.
Wow. And I mean, we've all heard stories, and not to be too much of a bummer, but like with the Holocaust, where people would survive, through these horrendous conditions in these death camps, right? Oh, I just said right. People, I caught myself on that one. That's good. They would survive, and they would ask them, my goodness, 99.9% of people didn't make it through this horrific condition that was designed to kill you. How did you survive? And I forget who the individual was, but one of the answers that came back was, I had to survive because I had to tell people what happened, right?
Wow.
That legacy needs to continue. And that internal motivation, that relatedness to make sure that his family, his fellow Jews, that they understood this and it would never happen again. That was powerful when I heard that related, right? Amazing.
Wow. Yeah, I never thought of it like that. That's that hits hard.
Yeah.
Well, so those are the the primary psychological needs that we're always looking at, and so I'm not sure how many people on the call here create training for their own teams, but this is something that I'm always looking at. Actually, and my partner and I recently published a paper through University of Michigan on this topic around leveraging motivation within both visual storytelling and learning design. So if this is a topic that you're interested in diving deeper into, we're just kind of scratching the surface today, but we'll share the link to that paper so you can take a look at that and really get deep into the weeds on some of this.
Yeah, I will flash it up on the screen, but before I do, I wanted to say congratulations, right? This is a huge amount of work by you and Richard, so nicely done.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a wild ride. This is one of my first academic papers. So it was went through a couple rounds of revisions, getting all the citations down correctly and all the fun minutia was interesting. But yeah, this is a big feather in my cap, I felt.
Oh, absolutely. This is amazing, right? So it looks like here, so people can listen to it as well as read it. It looks like it's very cool.
Yeah. They have an auto translate thing, which actually doesn't sound too bad. I listened to part of it, and it's fairly humanized.
Very good. So when an educational experience is positive and inspiring, it can transform the lives of learners 100%. Right? So I will grab this link and we'll see, right? Because we talked about last time, it seems like LinkedIn doesn't like it when you put links in here. So I'm going to see if I can fool it and take out the HTTPS and see if that works. If not, Austin has.
Yeah, feel free to message me.
Yep, absolutely. His email is right here, austin@sage.media. And this is on my agenda to read this weekend.
Nice. So yeah, so I mean everything we kind of talked about leads to, probably the question that most of y'all are thinking right now. Great. Here's some information about motivation and things like that. What can I do? And so this, gets into the element of how do I utilize this information in a way that can enhance food safety culture? And so one of the things that, whether you're creating a training program or you're just trying to create an inspiring environment to drive food safety behaviors, there's certain tools or tricks that can, I don't like to use the word tricks. There's certain tools that you can use to help drive that motivation. And so when we're looking at how to drive that, what we refer to as that intrinsic motivation, right? That highest level of motivation where people are just doing something because of the sheer joy. One of the biggest tools that we have that is inherently intrinsically motivating is curiosity, right? So when we think about curiosity, by definition, it is intrinsically motivated. I can't force you to be curious about something. You either are or you aren't. So trying to create the environment in which people are curious about something. And so a lot of times we become curious when we realize that there are holes in our knowledge. We become aware that there are holes in our knowledge, and we want to intrinsically, we're motivated to fill those gaps. And be like, so this is why, with my company, with Sage Media, why we use storytelling and producing training films that, are more story driven, feel kind of like you're watching a Netflix show, as opposed to just two people talking about the importance of food safety. We create these stories that utilize storytelling methodology. And part of storytelling is to withhold information as long as you can to keep the viewer engaged, right? Yeah. If I give you all the answers, it becomes very boring. I'm not engaged. And that's what a lot of typical training films do, right? They're didactic in nature. They're just giving you information. And it's like, well, you could have just put this on a PDF and given it to me. There's the use of the modality of video is irrelevant. It's just, it's a shiny object as opposed to like truly harnessing the power of film and storytelling, which is how do I create those gaps in knowledge or that awareness that I have these gaps in my knowledge to get people to go, wow, what would I do there? How would I behave in this situation? What would I have done differently? What information am I lacking? And so, that's why storytelling for us is one of the strongest tools in driving that curiosity and that intrinsic motivation. We're trying to create an environment where people are engaging simply because of the joy of curiosity.
TV shows are so for me, a great example coming to mind, Austin, is like murder shows. So a murder happens, right? And the detectives show up and they're like, there's a body, all right? Now, if all of a sudden somebody came out and said, yep, I'm the killer, I did that. But now you got to figure out how I did it. Ha, 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 right? No, it never happens that way, right? Right. Oh, I just said right. And you said right. Oh, right. It's everywhere. So did we watch the murder show to figure out who done it, right? Oh, I just did it again. And wow, this is an ingrained habit I've got to really undo. And they'll have the first witness and they'll point some information and the breadcrumbs start developing. And we get curious, right? We're like, and you're sitting there with your wife and you're like, I think that guy did it. And your wife says, no, 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 I think this lady did it over here. And a lot of times when you're watching these shows, they'll throw you off and they'll give you a little hint. Mm-hmm. And it takes you in this direction, and then they do a flip on you, and you're surprised, and you're like, oh, it's actually this guy. And yeah, perfect. You watch that because you're curious. And a lot of times I know I catch myself watching shows that are kind of like, this is kind of crappy show, but I'm hooked on it now, and I have to watch to the end to see who did it.
Right. Correct.
And I think that's an appropriate use of the word, right? You're not using it as a filler. You're doing an affirmation of what I said. So I'm going to let you off the hook on that one.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I mean, so how do we, the question that I would pose to the audience or to everyone listening is to ask yourselves how you can create these opportunities to drive curiosity within the people you work with, or to even create a level of curiosity within your own work, to take that, what's the word, growth mindset, and say, well, how can I look at this in a different way and continue to enhance the work that I do? But
I just had a great thought on that, Austin. See what you think of this. So environmental monitoring training, right? We need to do environmental monitoring our facility according to FDA 21 CFR subpart 17G. We need to, because we produce ready to eat foods. This is a requirement of our business. And if we have vector analysis, okay, whatever. Right. Versus, okay, everybody, we're going to do a training and we are going to do a investigation, right? And we're going to do problems and we're going to figure out where this stuff went, right? Here is the potential culprit. Where do we think this stuff went? Oh, I got an idea. Maybe it came from the door. Good thinking. Let's go take a, and engaging with the people who are in the training with that curiosity. So to your point, right, we all have that, right? We all have that inherent need. So maybe you could build trainings around that curiosity piece, like the murder mystery. Who done it? How'd that listeria get here? Who done it? Right.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And, and so you're kind of tapping into another aspect that we try to utilize a lot, which is creating an inductive learning experience as opposed to a deductive learning experience. So deductive is what we typically think of whenever we think of like going to a college class or high school class, and we sit down and information is bestowed upon us, and then we're expected to, memorize that and then go forth and do good in the world, right? Behave in a new way. And as anybody who's seen me speak on the show before, I find a way to put this phrase into pretty much every show that I come onto, which is that knowledge does not equal behavior. And so it's such an important aspect of learning design, is that we cannot assume that just because people have new knowledge or new information that they will behave in a new way. There's this huge chasm between those two different levels of learning evaluation, between measuring knowledge and measuring behavior. But when we talk about inductive and deductive, so deductive is that, like, I'm given the information by the trainer, versus inductive, which is what I prefer. And this goes back to the storytelling methodology, which is that instead of being provided, all of the rules of the game and then validating it with experiences, which is what we see in deductive, inductive says, take a look at this. Tell me what you think. Try and fail at it. And then I'm going to give you the rules of the game, so that now I have to engage in critical thinking, right? So to give you an example, I talk about learning, the different classes of animals, right? You've got kingdom and phylum and species and things like that. Now, if you've never seen this before, that doesn't make any sense, right? But so the teacher can say, this is what a kingdom is, this is what a phylum is, this is what a species is, and give those examples. That's the deductive method. If they were going to do it in inductive, it's like, okay, well, here's here's a bird, here's a monkey, here's a beetle. How would you organize these? What would you do? How would you put these into a class? And more than likely that the person is not going to choose the class system that we have all accepted scientifically, but it gets them thinking critically. And that's my goal, is I want critical thinking. I don't just want knowledge regurgitation. We need people and we need employees who can think critically about a situation and come up with ideas on the fly. And so that gives them a chance to go and look at it, start to think about this themselves, go, okay, well, I would organize it like this. And then the facilitator goes, okay, I see what you're doing here. Let me show you now the actual rule of how this actually works. And so same thing like you were saying with the cleaning, right? It's like, instead of just going and giving the information, let's go out and let's try some stuff, right? Like if you've never swabbed before, go out and do it the way that you think it would be most important. And then come back and we're going to take a look at that. You're going to tell me why you think that was the best way. And now I'm going to show you some stuff that you probably didn't know, right? And so here are the highly problematic areas. But now you've given them the chance of autonomy, right? They've gone out, they've done it, they've made their own choices. And now they're going to learn what the proper way is. Because ultimately, new skills are just doing the same thing over and over again until you master it. That's what learning is.
Exactly. So here's an example from my environmental monitoring. So you may impart a little bit of information to the team, like, okay, to your point, animals are organized according to different rules. It's the same with environmental monitoring. Okay, guys, here's a piece of information. Listeria likes environments that are a little colder. Where in our plant would Listeria like to be? Let's go out and take a look.
Mm-hmm.
Versus Listeria prefers cold environments, which means condensation occurs at the entrances. These particular areas where you have a temperature change, it likes the refrigeration areas. These are the things we need to look at.
Right.
So lecture versus engagement.
Definitely. And that's ultimately what we're looking for, is the engagement. So that's figuring out a way to create that, like I said, that curiosity, but also allowing for that autonomy to try and fail. Because if we don't fail at something, I mean, and this gets back to the concept of zero tolerance type programs, right? Getting away from this mindset of failure is failure. And it's like, no, failure is learning opportunities. So let's get comfortable with the fact that we're going to find pathogens. We're going to find issues. And that's just the way things are. And so we need to find them and hunt them down and get rid of them. A perfect environment just doesn't exist. This is a constant battle. And so getting away from that zero tolerance, where it's like, no, everything has to be perfect, because then you're going to, like you said, you're going to get the reports that, when we go back to that extrinsic motivation aspect, right? If I am rewarded based on zero findings, then lo and behold, you're going to get zero findings, because that is the extrinsic motivator that has been put forward. Now, if the extrinsic motivator is, I need you to find 3 issues every week that we can work on, then now I'm going to go out and I'm going to find those 3 issues, and like hell or high water, I'm going to find something wrong to work on, which is actually what we want in food safety. We don't want to bury those. We want to find them.
I love that, because it reminds me of, what's the example was it in your brain, the RAS, reticular activating system. So for example, if you are looking to buy a new car and you're doing some research and you're like, wow, I really like this new BMW. That's a sharp car. All of a sudden your brain starts looking for BMWs. And when you're driving around, you see them everywhere, right? Oh, look at that. There's another BMW. There's another one, right? They were there before. You just weren't paying attention. So I'm linking up your example with that, which is, okay, activate that RAS system in your brain and say, I want you to go out now that you have this knowledge around Listeria, go out and find and look for that. And your brain is hardwired to do that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's so it's, all of these things are just slight tweaks. Like, we're not making these massive radical shifts when it comes to food safety culture. It's just having a better understanding, metacognition around how we behave and how we work and why we do the things that we do and how we learn, and all these little things start to kind of just incrementally add up. It's compounded interest of knowledge of human behavior, which really is all we're looking at when it comes to food safety culture. Because in my opinion, food safety culture is not it's not your HACCP, it's not your GMPs. It's, those are elements, but those are processes, right? That they serve their purpose. The culture side is the human behavior side. Why isn't the HACCP plan working, right? Why aren't we meeting the GMPs? Well, it's typically there's a human element at play there. So that's where we get into the culture aspect. And as a side note, there's a really cool book that I've been reading recently called Sapiens, and it's about the entire history of humanity, from back when Homo sapiens kind of split off from Neanderthals and then moved into the agricultural revolution, where we started actually harnessing the land for our own, and then all the way up into modern times. Right now, I'm around 3000 BC within the book. So I've gone from 1.8 million years ago up to 3000 BC. But what's fascinating when they talk about culture and mythology, and this concept of, I talk about corporate mythology, that we have to create these stories or these mythos, which means this historical story that explains why we do what we do. And that can come through within these stories that we create around food safety culture, things like that. But because typically the way that we have created like the banding together of tribes and larger scale coming together of people was through these myths, and I don't mean myth in the way of like fictitious myth, but we utilize myths in the way of like how we explain what foods to eat out in the wild, right? The mushroom that grows on this side of the tree is healthy. The one that grows on this side of the tree will kill you. All of this information was really translated through mythology and story. And so finding ways to create these story structures for our own organizations to band people together to create culture, right? Because that's ultimately what culture is these shared values, beliefs, and norms within an organization. So, and then the stories create the curiosity. Hopefully you're seeing how this all kind of ties together. It's one big, it's a domino effect of how we drive that behavior within the culture.
Yeah. So So a particular example for me, right, I'm watching Vikings, and you're talking Norse mythology and these type of things, and then Greek mythology. Part of the lessons behind those, they were teaching. Mm-hmm. So even if you're a god, right, and you behave poorly, and your hubris brings you down, therefore don't do this.
Right.
Rules going back thousands of years under kosher law: don't eat animals with hooves in this particular situation, or shrimp or what, because at some point in time, to your example with the mushrooms, somebody may have gotten sick from eating a pig because it was improperly cooked and they got a parasite. And so somebody saw that and went, whoa, okay, write that down. Don't do that. And then it gets written into these stories. And the Bible is a giant collection of stories, and using storytelling to give moral lessons.
Without a doubt. And so that is how historically how knowledge has been transferred, right? Is through these myths, through these stories. And so therefore we as Homo sapiens, we're almost kind of hardwired for that, and there's a book called Hardwired for Story that talks about this, that it is almost part of our DNA to, when someone starts to tell a story, like how our brains actually start to fire up and start to think about this. And it's like, okay, now I'm in storytelling mode. I gotta pay attention and listen to see where this is going to go, because I want to know if I can figure this out. right before it gets to the end.
So they're triggering curiosity.
Exactly.
Wow.
So yeah, and then another great way to kind of drive curiosity is to indulge in like fantasy, right? So in the way that I talk about fantasy is like through case studies, so anytime I do a presentation or I have to get on stage and do a thing, I almost always open with an analogous story of some sort. So I do most of my talks in food safety conferences, but I might open with a story. I have a fascination with like the airline industry, with NASA, and so going and looking at either tragedies that happen there, and then like what could we learn from that, and then how does that segue into the work that we do, and how can we kind of like take this analogy and connect it. But that's a sense of fantasy, looking at other people's mistakes and then asking ourselves, well, how would I have done things differently? That's the same concept of engaging in fantasy. And so utilizing those case studies of both big wins and big failures, and incorporating that into the conversation with employees, to get them to say, okay, well, what would we have done differently? So it's like, okay, well, let's actually pull the PCA story and look at what happened here. Here's 3 facts that we know. What could have been, what could have avoided this tragedy, if anything?
Right.
and that, or going back to, I mean, there's so many recalls throughout the year that it doesn't even have to be a big name story, right? It's like recently the alfalfa sprouts, there's recalls.
Enoki mushrooms. Oh my goodness, enoki mushrooms. Gee, many Christmas. Don't eat those.
Right. So it's like going back and then providing that opportunity to say, well, what would we have done differently? What would you have done differently? How could this, and that it works no matter what the department is, right? Because
that's a great example. I still remember, and I'm not going to share her name because I'm sure this is going to haunt her for the rest of her life. But I remember the name of the head of quality with Peanut Corporation of America because of the stories that were told on what happened and then the consequences of that, and the fact that she had to spend jail time for what she did at PCA.
Yeah.
Powerful. It sticks with you.
It really does. So like, and then another one that's really cool, to kind of like tap into some of that motivation is rewards and recognition, right? I mean, it's an extrinsic motivator, but it's very powerful. So, when people bring issues to light, rewarding and recognizing them for that behavior, because then that also reflects to the rest of the team that information is valuable. And then, so that ties into that level of mastery, that you show people your mastery is rewarded and respected, by finding these issues. And so that's one more way you can kind of build that motivation to continually bring this stuff forward, is by making that public.
Amazing. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Gosh, I'd love to keep talking about this. Let's bring this kind of back up to the 30,000 foot level. So any closing comments or kind of tying this all together around that idea?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is that, my goal is to just kind of share this information around motivation so that we can know our own motivation, what drives us, so that we have that metacognition. So just like Bryan recognized that he says the word right a lot, he can't begin to improve himself without that self-awareness and that metacognition. And before we can lead people through these food safety culture journeys, we have to recognize our own issues that need to be resolved, and also our own motivation. So really, this is it's a borderline self-help topic, but also one that translates into how you can create the environment that creates those motivators. But by understanding the motivator and those psychological needs that need to be met, then it empowers us to start to create that environment. So much of food safety culture starts with, leadership coming down. And what I've realized over the years is that leadership's not always going to be there. They're not always going to buy into it. So we just got to change our own behaviors and start to lead with within the little fiefdom that we have. It might be 4 or 5 people. We might not even be a technical leader, but we influence those around us through our, social interactions. So finding ways to kind of slip all these new food safety behaviors in. That's really my ultimate hope, is just to share that information.
So in other words, you need to be the leader. If you want to improve food safety culture, it starts with you. It doesn't start with the CEO. They're important in the process, but you can take action. And this has been an exceptionally important chat. And I thank you for this, Austin. It all starts, right? We've all been working on this food safety culture thing. And how do we take all this information? What we're talking about today are universal principles of how people operate and what motivates them. And we need to understand this. Again, right, a lot of times we get too caught in the technical side of things. The people side of things is exceptionally important, and we need to master that. So thank you again, Austin. If people want to read their paper, they can email you, I assume?
Definitely.
Absolutely. And I'm also going to, with your approval, post this in the locals group as well, Austin, if that's okay with you.
Definitely.
So that, again, my locals group is free, right? And it's a great resource. I post recalls in there and other information to keep us all up to speed, because food safety is for everyone, right? And this is super important. Again, wow, great chat. Again, next week we'll be back on this same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook for the next chat. And again, thank you, Austin. Fantastic chat. I really enjoyed this. And you got my wheels going here today for sure.
Awesome. That was always my hope.
Yeah, great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We do this for you, and we're so glad you're here. Thank you for investing the time and learning and growing. It's what makes everybody happy in life, and I'm glad that you're doing it with us. So we'll see you back here next Friday for the next chat. Thanks again, Austin. Have a great weekend, and enjoy, everyone.
Have a good one, y'all.